When Dawn was a teenager, she spent a few months sailing around the Bahamas with her family. The trip evoked so many happy memories that a couple of years ago, Dawn suggested to her husband that they should attempt a similar trip with their 3 young children. With very little sailing experience between them, they spent 5 months sailing around the Bahamas. Dawn shares her story and tips on how other families can sail long-term with kids.
I had done this when I was a teenager, and it was such an impactful experience for me when I was a kid that one day at Christmas we were talking and I was saying, I really want to do this with my children. And my dad was kind of like, well, instead of just going and buying your own boat, he had a boat in the Bahamas. And he's like, why don't you test it out and, take 6 months off and go with your kids and do this and see if you like it. And then see if you want to go and you want to buy your own boat. So yeah, it was really kind of neat to be able to take my kids and go back and show them some of the places, that, I had remembered and kind of have some of the same experiences. So.
In terms of preparation, like your sailing background, you obviously brought up sailing. And what about your husband?
My husband had no sailing experience. Like him and I, we've been together since high school. So he's been around my parents' sailboats and stuff. But we never had our own sailboat. We never really went out sailing on our own. I had sailed growing up in the summers. And then my parents had done 2 years where we went to the Bahamas when I was a teenager. But even then, my parents were kind of in charge of the boat. Like I remember, and I helped out a little bit, but I didn't have a lot of sailing experience. So when we made the decision that we were going to do kind of 5 months on the boat, we kind of did some dinghy sailing in the summer just to kind of get my husband up to speed with kind of just basic sailing mechanics. He's an engineer, so he's really handy. So he's good at he can fix engines. And that's like a big part of living on a sailboat because you have to be totally self-sufficient. So he was good at that part. And he's a quick learner and he was excited about the experience. So yeah, we did some sailing in the summer before we went. And then once we went down to the Bahamas, we overlapped with my parents for a month and we kind of called it Boat School 101. And basically we would go out every day and with them and we'd practice anchoring, we'd practice navigating, we'd practice doing everything. To the point that, we felt comfortable. And I think also that they felt comfortable giving us their boat to kind of go off for a few months on. So.
And your kids were quite young, really. So were you nervous in terms of the safety aspects? And were they really good at swimming before you left, for example?
Yeah, the youngest would have been 3 when we went. So, he learned to swim in the deep end, like in the deep pool area while we were away. The other 2 were decent swimmers, but you still have to be careful with little kids. There's waves and everything. We're pretty conservative by nature. So, we kind of planned the trip. We weren't going to go, and do 5 days offshore where we never saw land or anything. We were just island hopping around the Bahamas. Because that was kind of what we were comfortable with. And we didn't really feel like we had the skills to do that much more at that point. And then in terms of water safety, the kids wore life jackets kind of any time that we were in the dinghy, the small little boat. Anytime we were underway and sailing, they wore life jackets. And, we had rules about kind of going up on the deck if the weather was rough and things like that. And you live and die by weather when you live on a boat. So, we were always checking the weather. There's so many ways you can get really good weather information, and we would be really conservative. So, if a big storm was coming, we'd make sure we were tucked in somewhere. We didn't go out in really rough weather. We were pretty conservative about it. So I wasn't overly worried because I'd had enough experience being in the Bahamas and I knew what it was like down there. And I think I also just had an attitude that we can do this. And, I had done it as a kid myself, and I knew lots of kids that grew up with it as well. So it didn't seem unsafe or anything like that. Yeah, it seems to be there's increasingly more and more families that I think are seeing the lifestyle. There's a lot of YouTube channels and a lot of blogs about families that are sailing. And I think people are seeing that. And just like RV, like traveling by RV, I think is really popular. I think people are seeing, sailing as a really neat option. And we met people that did it without any sailing experience. They there's people, that very little sailing experience. I think you build up to it. You start slow. If you're starting from the US, the Bahamas is really close to the US. It's quite easy to get over. And like anything, you build up your experience. And there's people doing it with very little experience.
That is very impressive, because you automatically imagine that you'd have to be a really competent sailor. It's something that you've trained for years to do. Not that you would just go out and, potter around and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I guess you can just travel at your own pace and, like you say, anchor up for, what's the longest time you spent in one place?
We actually, that first place that we went when we were with my parents, we were there for about a month. And it's a real magnet place in the Bahamas where a lot of other family boats and other boats kind of come and they'll spend a month or two, which is really nice for the kids because when you are sailing around, the kids don't have too many other kids to play with. So whenever you meet another family boat, you're kind of try to stay together and travel together because it's nice for the kids and obviously nicer than for the adults. Yeah, so it was really nice. But we anchored every night, and generally we would stay somewhere, probably 3 nights, but up to a week maybe, like, with the exception of that one place we went for a month.
Is it expensive in terms of like mooring? How does that work? Do you have to pay an individual price for each night in each destination? Does it vary quite a lot?
Well, if you dock, obviously it's quite expensive. But most people who are doing this for a lifestyle, they're going to be anchoring or mooring because it's much cheaper. And then you have your little dinghy that you use to get ashore. A lot of places in the Bahamas, you can just anchor wherever you want and you don't pay at all for that. Now, it means you don't have any facilities or anything to go to. Places like the British Virgin Islands that are a bit more developed, the cruising infrastructure, they have moorings, and a lot of the moorings are there to protect the marine floor, and that you have to pay. But it's, I don't know exactly, but I think it's like $20 to $30 a night. It's nothing, not too expensive. And then sometimes you get some facilities there as well, like a toilet, showers on land.
God, that's great.
Yeah, overall sailing, I mean, like anywhere in the world, it depends where you go, but it actually can be really economical. I mean, boats, like an RV, you have to maintain it. So there, are a lot of costs associated with that. But once you're actually sailing around, and when we were in the Bahamas, there wasn't anything really to spend money on, other than groceries. There's no real, there's the odd restaurants and bar and stuff, but there's really nothing to spend money on. There's no attractions, theme parks, anything like that. So you're buying your groceries, you're buying your petrol for the boats, some boat supplies and maintenance, but it's very, very inexpensive.
Sounds very attractive, actually.
I know.
I know they were very young, but how involved did the kids get with helping out on board? Did the older kids actually have some jobs that they had to do on a daily basis?
Not too much. I think the oldest would have been 7 or 8, I guess. So they, little cleaning jobs when we'd get anchored and set up, you'd have to kind of clean up the deck and everything, and they'd help with things like that. I think most of all, though, they got to know, if mom and dad are navigating through a tricky area or they're trying to anchor, because those can be really stressful situations, they got to know, okay, we need to kind of be good and stay quiet, and because it takes two people to kind of do a lot of those tasks. So it doesn't really leave anyone to be doing a lot of the main childcare and keeping the kids entertained. So yeah, they didn't help out too much. Certainly as kids get older, I think there's more opportunity for them to participate.
And do you have like the sailing bug now? Has it persuaded you to actually buy a boat, or have you bought a boat?
It ended up happening. We came home and we loved the experience, because what I love about sailing, and I think it's similar to like full-time RV life, is that you have this home and you get to travel around in this home. And that's the best part about it. You're not living out of suitcases, you have a home. And I also really liked that you're self-sufficient. So you have to create your own electricity, your own water. And because it's a small boat, so we're talking about a 40-foot sailboat. It's not very big. There's not a lot of privacy. There's not a lot of room to bring things. So it's minimalist living, whether or not you want it or not, you can't have a lot of things. So those are all the things that I really loved about it. We came home and we were like, yes, we're going to work for a year or two, and then we're going to buy a boat and we're going to go off sailing. And while we came home, my husband had an opportunity for work to go to Australia. So that's what's brought us, where we're living in Australia right now, kind of doing expat life here in Australia. But that boat thing is always in the back of my head. And it's definitely something that we vowed we want to do again with the kids, like a longer trip. I'd like to do a year or two long trip.
Do you have any words of wisdom for parents who are considering a sailing trip? Where should they start, and would you recommend it?
Yeah, I definitely, for those kind of for those reasons that you get to have a home that you travel with, which I think is a really cool part about sailing. I think it's a great way to travel with kids. I would think if you have no sailing experience, you definitely want to build up your sailing experience. So, there's courses that you can take, even online. There's online just navigational courses, but obviously also getting on a boat, you can build up your experience. And then I would start realistically. So there's certain parts of the world, like the Med is a really good place, where it's, a little more protected, some of the areas, or the Caribbean, the Florida East Coast, where you can get some sailing experience. But I think it's a wonderful way to travel with kids. And Yes.
I think what you said about it always having your home there, that's what's come up in so many conversations that I've had with people who've taken their RV. You always had that constant, and you were able to take more possessions and just create something that was a bit more welcoming. So wherever you were in the world, that was always your
Yeah.
place. So I
Yeah,
think,
and you could maintain some of the same routines too, because we would eat dinner on the boat, kind of in the same space. After dinner, we'd play cards in our kind of little living area. So you can have some of the same routines that you'd have at home, but you're still during the daytime. You're seeing different things. The kids have a bed and a room kind of that's theirs still.
I didn't really think of it as being the same sort of network. Like you said, you meet families and then you sail on together. I think that's really nice, actually.
Yeah, there's just like anything now. There's Facebook groups. So like there's one called Kids for Sale, and people will post like, we're in the British Virgin Islands for the next month. Are there any other kid boats? Do you want to meet up? Because same thing when families are doing around the world trips, your kids want social interaction and they want to be with other kids. And sailing sometimes, I mean, you spend weeks without kind of many other kids around. So it's so nice for the kids to kind of get together. And once you get with a group or other families that, you get along with and the kids are kind of similar ages, yeah, you'll travel, for a couple of weeks together, and it gives the kids a chance to kind of have playmates. And
Great.
it's good for the adults too.
What? Yeah, definitely.